In this episode of the Discover the Word podcast, Vivian Mabuni is back at the table with Elisa Morgan and Daniel Orion Day and Rasool Berry. And she'll be taking the group to one of the Psalms that is one of our favorites because of the way it helps us trust God when our life has so much uncertainty in it. It's Psalm 16, a psalm of trust.
I know that we understand that that's part of the Christian life, is trusting God. It's not a constant necessarily because life comes at us with circumstances that we may not expect. And I've needed to, at times, actively remind myself again, okay, the money is yours, God, ultimately, and the house is yours, and the kids are yours, and my husband is yours, and ultimately I am yours. So we're going to be looking this week at one of David's Psalms, Psalm 16, and it's a psalm of trust.
Yeah, and so be part of the conversation and discover how Psalm 16 can help us put our faith ahead of our feelings of angst and anxiety. Does that sound like a psalm that would be worth spending some time with? Yeah, I think so. We'll start by talking about what we mean by trusting God, and how do we know if and when we are actually trusting God. Psalm 16, a psalm of trust, is our study in this edition of the Discover the Word podcast. And this is Discover the Word Bible Engagement for Life from Our Daily Bread Ministries. And we do that, study the Scriptures together in community, like a small group Bible study that you may be part of, because we found that studying Scripture with others is a way that has impact and often results in transformation in the way we think and the way we live. And so, in this episode, we invite you to pull your chair up to the table with Viv and Elisa and Daniel and Rasool as they turn in their Bibles to Psalm 16 and explore why and how this psalm can help us learn to trust God, especially when things are so uncertain and we don't know what the outcome is going to be. What does it look like to trust God then? Well, I think that's a good place to start. So let's listen as Vivian begins by asking the group basically that question.
All right, friends, it's great to gather around the table and open up the Scriptures. I think what I wanted to do as we jump in is to just throw out this question to you. What does it mean to trust God, and how do you know if you're doing so?
Oh. That's a challenging one for me right now. Yeah. I think I am until I don't. It's basically it. We've had many conversations around this table and about worry or about being anxious or about God's will and call in your life or etc. And I'll think, yeah, I really do trust him. Mm-hmm. And then I'll find myself laying awake at night fretting, or I'll be anxious in my stomach as I board a flight, or I'll watch the news and go, oh, So I do until I don't.
As a person who is usually very action oriented and my default position is fix it myself, what it means for me to trust God is wait, to pause, to allow space for God to kind of speak to me and to relinquish the control of trying to do things on my own. And so I think when I'm in a cadence of doing that, I know I'm in a good place of trusting God. When I find that I'm starting to feel really out of sorts with myself and go all the time, that's what's giving me an indication that I'm probably not trusting God like I need to.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question. What does it mean to trust God? It means to look toward him, right? So through prayer or through reading the Scriptures, through seeking his guidance. It means in situations that are beyond our control, kind of an awareness of the fact that God is in control ultimately, and finding his peace in those moments that feel out of control, knowing that he's at work, that he's good. Probably related to that is holding on to some of the promises of God when they don't necessarily seem true in the moment. Promises like he works things out for the good of those who love him, or that he really is in control, those types of things, that he's sitting on the throne of the heavens, that one day he'll make all things right, those types of things. I think those are some of the ways that we can trust in God. How do I know if I'm doing it? I think Elisa's pretty spot on with, usually we know when we're not doing it. It's easier, I think, to know that because we are antsy or anxious or whatever. And maybe the times we know when we are trusting God are the times that we're surprisingly at peace, when it doesn't make sense that we'd be feeling peace in whatever it is we're going through or something like that.
Yeah. I know that we understand that that's part of the Christian life is trusting God. I agree with all of your responses. My heart echoes with so much of what you've shared. It's not a constant necessarily because life comes at us with circumstances that we may not expect. And there is, for me, a re-upping sometimes of a relinquishing of the things that matter to me. I've needed to, at times, actively remind myself again, okay, the money is yours, God, ultimately, and the house is yours, and the kids are yours, and my husband is yours, and ultimately I am yours. And that relinquishing of control. And I think that for me, when I'm experiencing anxiety and all of the angst, I know that there's me trying to grab it back. Right, to grab it back. And it's a kind of an ongoing thing. And it's our human experience, I think. So we're going to be looking this week at one of David's Psalms, Psalm 16. And it's a psalm of trust. And it's a beautiful psalm. I have been chewing on it for quite some time. As most of you know, that the Psalms are a collection of beautiful poems. There are 5 books in the Psalter altogether. So this one lands in the first one, in Psalm 1 to 41. That's considered the first book in the book of Psalms. And it's a collection of David's prayers. So it's considered also a messianic psalm because it's mentioned in the New Testament, and we'll look at that later on. But let's start off just by reading the psalm together, and each of us taking a few verses. There's only 11 verses in this psalm, but Elisa, why don't you start, and we'll just go around the table.
Psalm 16, a miktam of David.
And a miktam, I'll just stop right there. It's not, the exact meaning is unclear, but it's generally considered a musical or literary term.
Okay.
And this psalm is attributed to David.
So maybe like a song almost. Okay. Protect me, God, for I take refuge in you. I said to the Lord, you are my Lord. I have nothing good beside you. As for the holy people who are in the land, they are noble ones. All my delight is in them.
The sorrows of those who take another god for themselves will multiply. I will not pour out their drink offerings of blood, and I will not speak their names with my lips. Lord, you are my portion and my cup of blessing. You hold my future.
The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Indeed, I have a beautiful inheritance. I will bless the Lord who counsels me, even at night when my thoughts trouble me. I always let the Lord guide me, because he is at my right hand. I will not be shaken. Therefore my heart is glad and my whole being rejoices. My body also rests securely. For you will not abandon me to Sheol. You will not allow your faithful one to see decay. You reveal the path of life to me. In your presence is abundant joy. At your right hand are eternal pleasures.
So just from our reading, what are some of your observations that you observe?
Well, so many of David's psalms are lament psalms, drawing attention to what's wrong in the world and asking God to do something about it, or describing trouble and sorrow and pain and those types of things. And this one is very positive. I think that was the first thing that jumped out to me, is there's a little bit of a protect me, God, for I take refuge in you at the beginning. But after that, it's really just all pretty positive statements about who God is.
Yeah.
What jumps out to me is the value in the presence of these affirmations that he says, you are my Lord. I will not pour out drink offerings of blood to these idols. I will always let the Lord guide me. There's like these declarations of what he will commit to do or what is true that I find really inspiring and like motivating.
I agree with what both of you have said. And I also see this proximity of God. There's this real connection, a relationship, almost a physical presence as well. He's saying, you're my portion. He talks about, you are at my right hand. And then he says, in the last verse, then he says, abundant joy at your right hand. So it's like both he's at God's right hand and God's at his right hand. So I really like the the presence
Yeah.
that he's experiencing.
Yeah. It is interesting how the words can change, the pronouns, like the you and the declaration of who God is, but also that you, it seems so much like an internalized truth, like this is what I know to be true of you.
That's
so
good.
Something, Daniel, that you mentioned right at the beginning, he starts off with a really quick prayer. It's just like, protect me, God, for I take refuge in you. And it's pretty straightforward. And sometimes I think we really complicate prayer, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be so much, but there's a sense of protect me, keep me safe, I take refuge in you. When you think about prayer in your own life, I'm just thinking of, actually just yesterday, Elisa, when we were not recording, you kept repeating, I will trust you, Lord. I'm trusting you, Lord. And those are kind of these breath prayers. What are some other prayers that you pray that are these basic, direct, non-complicated kind of prayers?
Lord have mercy.
Yeah, the mercy prayer. And that's the truth. I pray that a lot when I watch the news, when I get a report of a school shooting or a bomb going off. Yeah, Lord have mercy. I was thinking too, I pray a lot, you love them more than I do. You know, when I think of my kids, my grandkids, people I love who are suffering or diseased or, you know, widowed or whatever, you love them more than I do. I try to remember God's good. You know, you're good.
Yeah, and that's, I think, why those declarations stuck out to me, because it reminds me of another song where it's like, Lord, you are good and your mercies endure forever. And that is something that I try to use to reframe things and just kind of declare the goodness of God over myself and over my mindset. Psalm 103, bless the Lord, oh my soul. Like sometimes just having to tell yourself, we're going to bless the Lord today.
Right.
I know you don't feel like it, but bless the Lord, oh my soul. Like David telling his soul, that is something that's been, I see here, like he's telling himself.
Yeah, it is. And God hears those prayers. He responds to those prayers. I'm looking forward to unpacking this psalm with you, because there's a lot of richness here that pulls out God's character, the example of David, his posture toward the Lord is what we're going to be looking at as well. And we're going to kind of look ahead too with some of the messianic aspects of this particular psalm. It's going to be a great week together.
Looking forward to spending this week's edition of the podcast in Psalm 16. And as I think we'll discover, there's so much there that can encourage us to see that trusting God, as difficult as it may be in a lot of life, is our best option. Psalm 16, a psalm of trust. Well, next, with that now as our foundation, we're going to explore the question of where we go to find life, meaning and purpose and joy and fulfillment. Where do you find those life-giving aspects of life? Well, the next section of the psalm helps us to assess what some of the places are that we look for life and fulfillment and meaning. And David in this psalm reminds us that God is our ultimate source of everything in life. And so what that means and why understanding that can help those other things be even more fulfilling is what we'll explore next.
We're looking at Psalm 16 this week, and it is a beautiful psalm. One of David's psalms. It's a psalm of trust, and I have found a lot of comfort reading it. However, as Daniel pointed out, there are some parts that are a little bit troubling or confusing, and so I thought we'd just take a moment, because it's important for us to read Scripture in its totality and in its context, and so let's not just skip over parts. So, Elisa, would you read verses 2 through 4?
Psalm 16, verse 2. I said to the Lord, you are my Lord. I have nothing good beside you. As for the holy people who are in the land, they are the noble ones. All my delight is in them. The sorrows of those who take another god for themselves will multiply. I will not pour out their drink offerings of blood, and I will not speak their names on my lips.
So I think it's good that you had us start in verse 2, because what I think's happening is there's a contrast being painted between the gods of the land, or Canaan, which is where they live, and Yahweh, or the one true God.
Yeah.
And so David's starting off here with, I'm saying to the Lord, to the true Lord, you are my God. And then he has this contrast between the holy and noble ones living in the land who are following the same God that he's talking about. And then those that increase their sorrow because they choose another God. And even the mention to drink offerings of blood, some translations call it libations of blood, which is just the Latin word for a sacrifice of liquid. And so basically it's just referring to practices, sacrificial practices that would honor or worship other gods. And so David seems to be contrasting. There's two options here.
Yeah.
There's the God that is the Lord. We have no good apart from him. And then there are other gods and other practices, and that leads to the multiplication of sorrows and pain.
Oh, and I think you're onto it, Daniel, because then it goes on in verse 5, you're my portion, God.
Yeah.
You're my cup of blessing. So that would contrast with
Yeah.
what you're saying with the other gods.
And I think the other part of that, verse 4, or take their names on my lips. One of the things that we see even echoed in the Ten Commandments about not using the Lord's name in vain, but there was also deep within the culture a desire to even avoid the mere mention of false gods. Like that there was this desire to keep my sense of reverence for God so intact that I don't even name the false gods. And so there does seem to be this contrast that is being drawn, that I am staying faithful to you. I am avoiding even the appearance of association or just being lax about that association because you're all I got.
Yeah, that is a great explanation. That does bring us right into the next few verses that we're going to look at, which is verses 5 and 6. Rasool, would you read that?
Sure. The Lord is my chosen portion and my cup. You hold my lot. The lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Indeed, I have a beautiful inheritance.
Yeah, so even there, right?
Right,
So
the cup.
Baal is how we often say it, is the god of Canaan. So when you're in that territory, you would be thinking, oh, I'm in Baal's territory. And David's saying, no, the real inheritance, the boundary lines of this area actually belong to the real God. And that's the one I worship too.
Yeah.
So even there, we're still seeing the comparison.
Definitely. And this cup of blessing versus this libation offering that again. Well, let's look at some of this idea of the Lord is my portion. There's a reference back to the 12 tribes of Israel and how they were all granted portions of the land except for the Levites. So let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 9.
Therefore, Levi has no portion or inheritance with his brothers. The Lord is his inheritance, as the Lord your God said to him.
So 18.
1 and 2. The Levitical priests, the whole tribe of Levi, will have no portion or inheritance with Israel. They will eat the Lord's food offerings. That is their inheritance. Although Levi has no inheritance among his brothers, the Lord is his inheritance, as he promised him.
So here we have this idea of the boundary lines and the Levites not having land, and their dependence was on not only the Lord, but God's people would be the ones to provide for them. And they ended up with the choicest meat, and because they were bringing their first fruits, their best offerings to sacrifice to the Lord. And then obviously the Levites were going to be able to partake in that. I think often that there are sometimes in our modern day, we have missionaries who are reliant on the financial support of others to fund their ministry. And it's kind of that same idea of like, I don't have land, Lord, you are my portion, and I'm relying on your people to supply my need.
Yeah, and I think, too, it's supposed to be a model for the rest of Israel of who really supplies for their needs.
Yes.
Right? So as the worship leaders of Israel, they're being provided for by the people of Israel. But it's a model for the fact that, you know, when you have a farm or you have sheep or you have whatever, God is the ultimate one who's providing for you.
Yeah.
And so here, because David's not of the tribe of Levi.
No. Tribe of Judah.
And he's the king, right? And so for him to talk about the Lord being my chosen portion and my cup, there's this idea that God is also my provider as well.
That's right. He's the ultimate source. So my question is, what are some of the places that we might look for life, or places that we need to be mindful of in our own lives to not make our identity or our life source?
You know, I love the fact that in this passage, it would have been possible for David to rely back to his own military success or his conquests, to say that his been my chosen portion. That is how the boundary lines have fallen in good places. But he
I went
ultimately
and got him.
I got him, right? Yeah, literally.
I conquered
I shed
him.
a lot of blood.
But the fact that he goes to the ultimate source that says that the Lord is my chosen portion and my cup, that is beautiful.
Yeah.
To say that, like, he's enough, he's more than enough. He gives me everything. And it says, like, I have a beautiful inheritance. And I think the lines have fallen in beautiful places. It reminds me of the different tribes, like when you read about the boundaries and was it Joshua and Judges, like where it's like, here's where you're going to be. And it's like, I am joyfully receiving what I have got from the Lord. It's a good thing.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to be said about my gifts, my financial situation,
Sure.
my health, wherever it is, not to compare it to what somebody else has, but to say I'm grateful for what God has given me.
Yes, that kind of gratitude.
So to contrast and answering your question, because that's really a good question, if I'm not really focused on God as my portion,
Right.
I could focus on my job.
Yeah.
I could focus on my family. I could focus on the money I have in the bank or don't. Anyway, I could focus on those things, the shoes in my closet.
Right.
It's just anything that
Yeah.
becomes more important or more identifying too
Right.
of who I am.
It is interesting, too. There's definitely a parallel in this psalm with the most famous psalm that's attributed to David, because in Psalm 23, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. And so there's this
portion.
idea of God's portion, his provision, his blessing. And yeah, I think for all of us, that's such a good reminder of where we often think success and things comes from, which is ourselves. And then we're really surprised when we run into those moments in our lives where we're still doing all the same things, but we're not being successful or providing whatever. And so there is this invitation here to trust in God and to look to him as our ultimate provider.
Doesn't it remind you too of Jesus in the New Testament? I am the bread of life. If those who are thirsty come to me, and he promises springs of living water to bubble up in us in John 7. And there is this overall provision. You go back to the manna and the quail in the wilderness, that God is our portion.
That's
and
right.
even the cup, right? Jesus
cup
lifts
that he
up
drank.
a cup and says that this is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for you, right? So even there, a blood offering, right, which we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, you have Jesus referencing a cup as the symbol of how much he loves us and cares for us. And when we drink of the cup, we're being reminded and experiencing the grace that God has for us too, which is pretty cool.
That is beautiful. I think that this whole idea of source and the reminder, and even how the Israelites were reminded that God was their source, as Daniel just alluded to, that people brought their first fruits as an offering, and we have that same opportunity as we give, and that our giving today now is an acknowledgement again that it's all from the Lord, and we can then hold on a little bit more loosely when we recognize that. So I think that the spiritual discipline of generosity and of giving of our time and our talents and our treasure is a way to help keep the truth of God as our source kind of in the forefront of our minds. Are there any other practices that you have seen that help you to keep God as your source?
I think for me, there's a question that's kind of bouncing around in reading this, which is just, is God alone enough for me? Because that's the other side of what he's saying. He's saying that the Lord is his chosen portion in his cup. You hold my lot. And so for me, I think there's almost a challenging question I'm left with, which is God enough for me?
I like that. In my translation, the NIV, it says, apart from you, I have nothing. But he also says, apart from you, I have no good thing, is the qualifier of good. He's the good, he's the best, but does that mean we have no other things?
No.
That's just a technicality.
Right.
But it's a good check.
And I think for me, that's why I appreciated the declarations, because there is something to be said, I think, for proclaiming what you want your heart to actually catch up to be true. So that if there is some competition in my heart for who the source is, it might be my ability or my job or something else. Lord, let me say to you, you are my portion, you are my cup, and not faking the funk, but so that I can get to the place where my heart catches up with my words.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that kind of flows right into this quote that I wanted to share with you that is attributed to Oswald Chambers, as well as a hymn from Francis Brooke. It says, quote, "My goal is God himself, not joy nor peace nor even blessing, but himself, my God."
Yeah, bottom line, God is our, as the psalm says, portion. He is where we find life. He's our ultimate source. Our jobs are not our life. Our marriage, our children, they're not our life. Our hobbies, our various pursuits are not life. And as they said, we need to be mindful that those things don't become our identity and our life source. Well, next we're going to explore the idea that being able to trust God is often a muscle memory issue. And so how do we develop muscle memory? Yeah, by practicing, right? Repeatedly, doing something over and over so it becomes a habit, our default, what we do almost automatically. And so for our trust muscle to get stronger, we have to exercise it. And we'll talk about whether our trust in God muscle is getting much of a workout after a time out for a word from Our Daily Bread Ministries. Now, Discover the Word is part of Our Daily Bread Ministries, which is what we call a Bible engagement ministry, providing a number of ways for you to interact with Scripture, because we know that that is a key aspect of a growing relationship with the Lord. Audio, video, publishing, internet, all ways we encourage Bible engagement for life. And so this week, as we study Psalm 16 and trusting God here on Discover the Word, I'll tell you about a book from Our Daily Bread Publishing by author Jill Bowen, in which she shares her own stories of difficult experiences and how God met her there with joy. No matter what, 90 devotions for experiencing unexpected joy in tough times is a book that will encourage you to trust God and find pops of joy instead of dwelling on life's difficulties. I hope you'll check it out. We'll have a link in our show notes for this episode to the book, No Matter What. Go to discovertheword.org and look for that link in the show notes. And so, do you remember when you were first learning to play a musical instrument, type on a keyboard, drive a car, catch a ball? Do you remember how difficult that was, at least until you developed a certain amount of muscle memory? Yeah, muscle memory is an automatic movement that you hardly have to think about doing. And your muscles do a lot of the work, but your brain actually stores the memory. The way you develop this muscle memory is through repetition and practice doing the same task over and over again. Well, as they continue to walk through Psalm 16, the group applies this idea of muscle memory to trusting God.
It's like trust is a muscle that we've got to work out, and keep in shape.
It's that muscle that we exercise and the memory that we hold that gives us more faith for the next journey.
Yeah, because what is it that develops that muscle memory? Practice, repetition, doing the same thing over and over again. So, back to Psalm 16, a psalm of trust.
So we've been looking at Psalm 16 and this beautiful Psalm of David, this idea that God is our portion, God being the source of our life, and David having this picture, even though he was the king, but he really declared that God was his source of life. Let's take a look at David's posture in verses 7 through 9.
I will bless the Lord who counsels me, even at night when my thoughts trouble me. I will always let the Lord guide me, because he is at my right hand. I will not be shaken. Therefore my heart is glad, and my whole being rejoices. My body also rests securely.
So what stands out to you from these verses?
I kind of get attracted to this right hand thing. I'm not sure I totally understand the right hand significance, but I think it has a powerful, it's like a military hand, and it's the judging hand and the conquering hand of God. Is that correct?
It's like the second most powerful place.
Okay.
Outside of the person itself. So
Good.
The right hand, totally. Seat of power, seat of might, the one who's in control next, the one who's the wise person you would go to next. It kind of embodies all that.
So for David to say that God is at his right hand, it is almost like God is his sword, God is his shield, God is his hammer, God is his everything, plus the one that he feeds with, the one that he, tucks under his chin to sleep with. It's just this all-encompassing presence of God and provision of God.
Yeah, he's like leading with God.
Right, because for most people, the right hand is the dominant hand, the strong one that one would use in battle. So it's almost this symbolic picture, too, of like, you're my right hand, I think about the aspect of the Lord who counsels me, and even in the midst of what is troubling, even at night when my thoughts trouble me, I will let the Lord guide me. I love that because it's the realness.
Yeah.
He's saying that he's not ignoring the fact that, my thoughts are troubling me right now. I'm having some anxious thoughts. I'm having some things going on. But even in the midst of that anxiety or that struggle, I'm still trusting in the Lord in that. And I think that's a really beautiful sentence or phrase, because it brings up both the reality that sometimes we find ourselves in, but also some light that can help us in that reality.
Yeah. It reminds me of Psalm 121. I lift my eyes toward the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not allow your foot to slip. Your protector will not slumber. Indeed, the protector of Israel does not slumber or sleep. So it's kind of neat to know that even in our anxiety, God never tires, because he's not like us. He's never stressed, and he's accessible even in the middle of the night when our anxious thoughts multiply.
Yeah, it reminds me of Psalm 3, verse 5 as well. I lie down and sleep, and I wake again, for the Lord sustains me. Right, so it's like the Lord is with us and sustaining us and walking through our anxious thoughts with us.
Yeah. In verse 8, it says, I always let the Lord guide me. Another translation says, I set the Lord continually before me. And that catches me as far as the posture of David is one of surrender, of continually looking to the Lord, allowing God to direct our steps, and that he goes first. So I'm curious if you have any stories that come to mind in your own lives of you making a decision that you would put God first, allowing him to guide you. Does anything come to mind?
I was in high school. Sometimes I would get a ride back from church to home if there was somebody that lived in my neighborhood. Sometimes I didn't. But as the collection plate was going by, I really sensed a strong sense from the Lord to give what I had. All I had was a $10 bill, which meant I had no way of getting home. If
you could take change out of the collection.
I didn't know about that strategy. So I put the $10 in, and not only did I get a ride home, but when I came back to my bedroom, there was a $10 bill on my bed. On my pillow, and it was like the Lord was saying, taste and see, like, trust me. I got this. And so I think so many years later, when I ended up becoming a missionary and working with cool people like Vivian, it was like the trust factor had only grown because I had seen him work in those small ways. But that kind of putting him first started to become easier, to become a habit when you do it and you see God show up.
Yeah.
I love that, Rasool. I love that. It's like trust is a muscle that we've got to work out, and keep in shape. I've had stories like that too, and they have so blessed me, and they've trained me to look for needs, and to be watching, for where I can give to. I'm thinking about a time I was sitting in church, and I was sitting next to a little toddler. Little toddlers' little legs just go straight out. Yes. They don't go down. They don't bend at the knee. They just go straight out, and their little feet go up. And I was just taken at the feet. And the Lord was just hovering and just said, I was thinking about how he knows what's going on in this little body of this little toddler. And my son was far away, and I was praying for him. And the Lord just reminded me that he knew where my son's feet were, and he knew the being that was in the shoes of my son better than I. And it reminded me of, seeing the disciples standing under the tree in the New Testament. Just his eyes roam the earth. And that has encouraged me so many times when I'm just wondering about how somebody's doing.
Yeah, I think remembering those stories of God's faithfulness in the past is a way that we keep the Lord ever before us, especially in stressful situations we're in now as well, whether it's remembering some of those stories that the two of you shared, or I have plenty of those stories in my own life too, where God showed up in a very real way. And in those moments when I don't feel like God is showing up, or I wish he would show up, remembering back over the ways that God has shown up is a great way to keep the Lord before me. And the way verse 8 ends, I will not be moved, right? So there's something about keeping God before us, the memory of God, the way God provides, that gives us confidence.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right. It's that muscle that we exercise and the memory that we hold that gives us more faith for the next journey. I remember when we had a missions trip to Japan, as missionaries, we were already familiar with raising financial support for our summer missions. And we had just bought our home in California, and my parents lived in Hong Kong. So we went to Hong Kong, came back, and it was literally days before we left for Japan. And we had maybe, I think it was less than $1,000 of like the $15,000 that we needed. And I went into full-blown panic because we just bought a home. And I thought, oh no, it's because we bought a home and people don't think we're real missionaries anymore. I don't know. I was just going, my mind was spiraling, and it sent me to fast. And I fasted and prayed and said, Lord, if you could bring in 1,000 of what we need, that's all I really need to trust you to get on that airplane, because we were leading this team. So I fasted the entire weekend, and come Monday, I get a knock at the door, and I look out the peephole, and there's one of our mail deliverers. Now, what had happened was when we got back from Hong Kong, another layer of this thing is we had a $500 a month monthly donor who wrote us a letter and said, I'm no longer able to support you anymore. So that was the layer that we were going into.
Yay.
So this is sending me into fasting.
Yes.
So Monday comes, and I look out the peephole window, and there's a postal worker there with a whole bag of mail. And he's like, are you the lady of the house? And I said, yes, I am. He goes, you're on my way, and this has been waiting for you in the post office. And we had stopped our mail when we went to visit my parents in Hong Kong, but we were getting mail, like that letter from the donor. And inside that mail were all of these encouraging notes and gifts toward our summer mission. And we hit that 1,000, and I knew we could get on the plane. And so I sat there, and it was as if God just said, Viv, you think you know how to do this whole missionary thing? Like, you write the letter, you send out this thing, you expect, everything to come this way. He goes, you're going into a country that's less than 1% Christian. You cannot rely on your gifting or this model of ministry, anything. You need to rely on me. And that was such a poignant point in time, marking in my ministry life, that
awesome.
God does not want us to rely on our gifts and the books that we read. He wants us to rely on him and to continue to have fresh faith. So I guess my encouragement to all of us is to not run ahead of God. And if he says to go, we go. And if he says to stay, we stay. And that's what it looks like to continue to trust him in the unfolding.
That recognition that God is our source. He is our provider. That's one of the main takeaways we're seeing here in Psalm 16. And that recognition provides a firm foundation for our being able to trust God with everything we encounter in life. But having a strong trust in God muscle is something that we build by using it over and over again. We've got to do it to develop that muscle memory. Well, next, in verses 7 and 8 of Psalm 16, they're going to find some statements that can help us put our faith ahead of our feelings of angst and anxiety that we're fighting. Because do we always feel like God is close by when we're in those extreme struggle times of life? And I think our experience often is that we don't always feel that presence in an exact way that we'd like to feel it. And so what can help us to trust that God is present with us, even if we're not feeling that way right now? Let's listen.
Well, Psalm 16, if you're like me, it's just been sweet to dig more into this psalm and see how David just beautifully describes God as his portion, how God is our source of life, and the response to set the Lord continually before him in a posture of surrender and dependence. We've been talking about all those things, but let's look at why and how David can respond in this confident trust. And so we're going to look again at Psalm 16, verses 7 through 9. Elisa, would you read that?
I will bless the Lord who counsels me, even at night when my thoughts trouble me. I will always let the Lord guide me because he is at my right hand. I will not be shaken. Therefore my heart is glad, and my whole being rejoices. My body also rests securely.
So to be able to declare that his body can rest securely, that confidence that David speaks of, why and how is David able to respond in this kind of confident trust?
I keep going back to this sense of the declarations that he's making about what is true and honoring his feelings, but also putting faith ahead of his feelings. I think that's the space between verse 7 and verse 9 of like, I'm having thoughts that are troubling me at night, but my heart is glad and my body also rests secure because I'm trusting God with the things that are troubling me at night. And I think that when I've been able to do that, when God has given me the grace to do that, that's where I have also found freedom of bringing my issues with God to God.
Yeah, because verse 8 says, I always let the Lord guide me. That's about faith. That's not about feelings. Because he's at my right hand, I won't be shaken. There is this, I choose you kind of thing to be my portion, to be the provision.
It's interesting that verse 9 ends with his body resting secure with how he started the psalm. Protect me, O God, for in you I take refuge. So there's this sense of asking God to be his refuge, to be his protection. And then his body rests secure because God is his refuge and his protection. There's definitely a layer to this of he's looking to God as the one in whom he rests secure, the one in whom he can trust. And that's where that security, that rest comes from. And really throughout the Psalms, throughout the story of the Bible, the idea of God being a refuge or a rock or something stable, high ground, the place you can find shelter, is something that's repeated over and over again. And it feels like that's part of what's being mentioned here, is that refuge part of who God is, that place high up on the mountains that's protected by rock and sheltered from the elements, in which we can find refuge and rest secure.
Can you think of times in your own lives and experiencing that?
Yeah, even recently I've been able to kind of experience going to the spiritual retreat, and I notice that part of the routine and the rules is that you have to turn your phone off, which is somebody who tends to be on it far too much. Like when you get those notifications on Sundays and it's like, you've been on your phone for, however many hours. I'm just in a place where I know I don't have other responsibilities and I don't have other distractions. I kind of wake up in the middle of the night with thoughts that are troubling me, but also that God is speaking to me in those. And then I sleep well. And it happens when I do that, or when I retreat. And so it's kind of this reminder for me also of not busying my thoughts with distractions all the time, that when I am still, I can hear the still quiet voice of God more clearly.
Yeah.
I think it's significant too that the word rest is used. So he says, my body rests secure. So if you think back even to the very creation of the world as it's described in Genesis, it ends with rest. Right? So there's this rhythm of working, but then pausing to celebrate, to rest, to Sabbath, to look at what's been done, to enjoy it.
Yeah.
We see God doing that first, right? And mirroring that for us. So there's this sense in which God, who doesn't get tired, right, is resting and celebrating his creation.
Interesting. Yeah.
But then there's very much an invitation for us into rest, which is something that we really need. And then in the Psalms in general, rest shows up all the time, both for those who don't find rest and those that do find rest, like Psalm 127, talking about how it's in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest. God gives sleep to his beloved. And then earlier in Psalm 3, where he talks about lying down and waking up again because God sustains us. Yeah. So I think that word rest is really important in here.
And you can only experience that rest when you are trusting in his presence.
Yeah.
And there is a provision in the rest that helps us rest.
I've been thinking lately because my husband and I have been trying to figure out better sleep and sleep hygiene. It's kind of one of the buzzwords right now, but it's a real thing that when I think about what a gift it is that sleep is, that of all the things that take place as we sleep, the detoxing of our brains and the healing and the repair that happens in our body. I mean, what a gift from the Lord, but it's so counter to what our society says as far as go, and bigger, faster, shinier, and we continue to strive for everything and God's rhythm. And I love that you brought in the Sabbath, Daniel, that people started off rested. We begin with rest and then go into the rest of our week. So I think that the order of that is so key as well.
Yeah, it's interesting too. He starts off Psalm 16 with protect me, in you I take refuge. And then we talked a lot in an earlier conversation about nighttime. In the night, also my heart instructs me, this idea that God's with us even at night. And then the Lord being always before me, and then my body resting secure. So there's like a theme to it, which comes from, Elisa, exactly what I think you were pointing out too, which is that God's at our right hand to protect us, to be there for us, so we can rest secured knowing that he's there.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked a lot about how David counted on that and utilized the power of God being at his right hand. Do we? Yeah. And it makes me pause. I mean, the strength that I possess, any kind of wisdom or intelligence that I have, those things don't just come by chance. There's also with God at my right hand. And as I yield my right hand to him as well.
It also feels a little backwards too. Like, shouldn't David be at God's right hand? Right? Well, it's like when you see those, when you see those, bumper stickers where it's like, God is my co-pilot.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Well, I think you want God to be your pilot. Actually, you should be the co-pilot. And I almost get that sense here where it's like, God's at my right hand.
Okay.
Well, maybe.
But let's stop for a second, because here's another illustration. I remember one time I had to take a really early morning flight to come up here to interview. It was Tim Keller, and we've been waiting to see Tim Keller as our guest for, 5 years or something. And I was supposed to fly in the night before, but my flight was canceled. So I go all the way back home, and then I get up at 4 to come get on the flight. And I was driving, and I really felt this compulsion to put my right hand out into the space of the passenger seat. And I just kind of held hands with Jesus the whole way there, because it was a daunting, complicated, tight scheduled visit that I didn't have a lot of confidence was going to pull off. But I was the only woman on the team then, and I really needed to get there, or it'd be a bunch of guys talking about what marriage. So anyway, I ended up holding God's hand. So there is something, because we really can't. I mean, I think that's the dance of trust.
I love the contrast about sleep and that how we're raising up this aspect of security. I know we brought up Psalm 121 before, but it's there too, right? He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. And so it's like we can rest because he doesn't rest.
That's right.
Absolutely.
We can have that sense of confidence and slumber because he will not let the sun or the moon strike us.
Yeah, working our way through Psalm 16, a psalm of trust, this time on the Discover the Word podcast, focusing in that part of the conversation on verses 7 to 9 and the difference it makes to know that God is always present with us. We can trust that. He will never leave us nor forsake us. Well, in just a moment, we will conclude this study of Psalm 16 and how it helps us to trust God even when the outcome of what we're going through isn't what we wanted or what we expected. But first, here's what's coming in the next edition of the podcast, a conversation that we had with our friend, best-selling author Leslie Leland Fields. Now, Leslie and her family have a commercial fishing business in Alaska. And in these conversations, we get a number of keen insights from a fisherwoman about following Jesus.
There was a time I tried to unfollow Jesus, when I tried to walk away from everything hard in my life. And just a little backstory, I was living on this remote island in Alaska, and we were commercial fishing, and my husband and I were working together. We were trying to work together, let me say that. And there just came a point when it was too hard, and I tried to walk away. In fact, I did. I got a backpack, I filled it with food and water and a gun for bears, and I walked off the island down to a cabin 4 miles away. And I was there for several days just wrestling with God and wrestling with what it meant to follow Jesus. I had said yes to Jesus about 10 years before as a teenager, but life was so hard, and it seemed like life got harder rather than easier in following Jesus.
Yeah, it's a fascinating perspective with some really great stories about following Jesus, even when life is super difficult. You don't want to miss this memorable conversation we had with Leslie Leland Fields from her home on Harvester Island, Alaska, on the next Discover the Word podcast. And now back to Viv and Elisa and Daniel and Rasool for the conclusion of our study of Psalm 16, a psalm of trust.
I have so enjoyed our conversation, and I see the value of studying the scriptures in community. That I could read the psalm on my own, and I could even read some commentaries and gain some new insights. But when I open the Word with other brothers and sisters, it's just a whole different experience. So I'm really grateful for our Discover the Word family. And I love that we always have an empty seat because the listener is part of our conversation as well.
And then there's Jesus.
And there's Jesus. That's right. So I thought it would be great for us to read the entirety of Psalm 16 together. Rasool, would you start us and then we'll go around?
Protect me, God, for I take refuge in you. I said to the Lord, you are my Lord. I have nothing good besides you. As for the holy people who are in the land, they are the noble ones. All my delight is in them.
The sorrows of those who take another god for themselves will multiply. I will not pour out their drink offerings of blood, and I will not speak their names with my lips. Lord, you are my portion and my cup of blessing. You hold my future. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Indeed, I have a beautiful inheritance.
I'll bless the Lord who counsels me, even at night when my thoughts trouble me. I always let the Lord guide me. Because he is at my right hand, I will not be shaken.
Therefore my heart is glad, and my whole being rejoices. My body also rests securely. For you will not abandon me to Sheol. You will not allow your faithful one to see decay. You reveal the path of life to me. In your presence is abundant joy. At your right hand are eternal pleasures.
So what has stood out to you from our study of Psalm 16?
I like how by just really taking our time with it, there's just certain things that pop out that you didn't see before. I think our conversation about rest and the restlessness that David was talking about, the thoughts that were troubling him, I think that's something we can all relate to, right? Of just some things that keep us up at night. And yet how him taking those troubles to God and allowing the Lord to counsel him and be his counsel allowed him to rest securely. I just love that arc that we see from verses 7 through 9.
We haven't talked very much about I have nothing good besides you, or in the NIV translation, is this apart from you I have no good thing. That verse God used mightily in my life during a certain season, and it was a season of singleness. And I just felt incomplete, frustrated, scared, longing, all those things. And the Lord led me over and over to that verse, and reading it here in context is very rich to look at 45 years of marriage to this amazing man. It was true, though, in my singleness, I didn't lack any good thing. And what the Lord began to teach me, and I know that word good is a rarity. I mean, we can't be good. Only God can be good. And the only good we can be in ourselves is His goodness in us. But I began to understand that if I was single, then it wasn't good for me to be married. And that's just how it works. You know, if I'm working in this spot and that's where God has me, then it's not good for me to worry about something else. I mean, there's times that shifts, but God's good provision is good, period. And it helped me to trust that my portion is enough.
Yeah, and I think also it's that His good provision is Himself as the provision.
Exactly.
Right? It's His presence, it's
and it
His
makes
goodness.
anything and everything good.
Yeah, because there are so many times in life where people or us are lacking something we need.
Right.
And sometimes the Bible's used to say that just ask God whatever you need and He'll give it to you. But really the primary promise of the Scriptures is that God doesn't leave us or forsake us in the midst of whatever we're struggling with or suffering with or whatever we're lacking. And so I think it's very intentional that you are my Lord. I have no good apart from you, right? Like you are the good thing. And that's kind of where the whole psalm ends as well. You reveal the path of life to me, right? You're leading me along this path. In your presence is abundant joy, right? That God is our joy. Doesn't mean that you have to like fake joy in different circumstances. God is our joy. And then at your right hand are eternal pleasures. So this like going beyond just this life, that God's goodness, His presence is eternal and goes with us, and that we'll receive pleasure and joy and life as a result of that.
That is beautiful. One of the unique things about Psalm 16 is it is considered one of the messianic psalms, where there's echoes of bringing the Old Testament into the New Testament. And we see this, and we could turn right now to Acts chapter 2, 24 to 32. And just to set this up, Jesus has ascended into heaven. He told the disciples to wait until the Holy Spirit comes, and His call to them in Acts chapter 1, and which is kind of lays out the whole rest of the book, is to be about being His witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. And the Holy Spirit comes on the day of Pentecost, and Peter gets up and he preaches this amazing sermon, and he mentions the psalm that we've been looking at. So let's look at Acts 2, 24 to 32.
God raised Him up, loosing the pangs of death, because it was not possible for Him to be held by it, meaning Him, Jesus. For David says concerning Him, I saw the Lord always before me, for He is at my right hand, that I may not be shaken. Therefore my heart was glad, and my tongue rejoiced. My flesh also will dwell in hope, for you will not abandon my soul to Hades, or let your Holy One see corruption. You have made known to me the paths of life. You will make me full of gladness with your presence.
Fellow Israelites, I may say to you confidently of our ancestor David that he both died and was buried, and his tomb is with us to this day. Since he was a prophet, he knew that God had sworn with an oath to him that he would put one of his descendants on his throne. Foreseeing this, David spoke of the resurrection of the Messiah, saying, He was not abandoned to Hades, nor did his flesh experience corruption. This Jesus God raised up, and of that all of us are witnesses. And that word Hades there is the Greek version of Sheol.
Yes.
Which is what we see in Psalm 16.
And actually, Elisa, would you read verse 33 in Acts 2?
This is talking about Jesus. Exalted to the right hand of God, He's received from the Father the promised Holy Spirit and has poured out what you now see and hear.
One of the classes I'm currently taking is biblical theology. And one of the lessons that we're learning is how many ways the Old Testament is fulfilled. And the promises from the Old Testament are seen exactly in the New Testament, and how Jesus took the time to explain on the road to Emmaus everything beginning from the prophets. Like, this is who I am, why I came, this is what was fulfilled. But Peter here is specifically quoting from Psalm 16 as a fulfillment of prophecy and who Jesus is. What else stands out to you from that?
Well, I think there's something deep about the relevance of this application for us, and that if you read it at face value, Psalm 16 could be read to think everything is always going to work out for me. I don't have to worry, because whatever it is that's troubling me, God is going to sort it out in the way that I think should go. And so I'm good. Whereas in this passage, what we see Peter bringing out is that even in the gospel message, it working out for Jesus did not mean avoiding the cross. Right? It meant experiencing the resurrection after the cross. And so what that means is I can look at Psalm 16 and still rest secure if whatever the thing is that I'm hoping for, trusting for, doesn't work out the way I intended, because there's a resurrection that I can't see or even anticipate in a specific way, but I can just trust that God has it in store for me, regardless of what the temporary outcome is, because David did see corruption, but not the son of David.
And it's so prophetic. You will not abandon me,
right,
to Sheol. You will not allow your faithful one to see decay. I mean, I'm going to die,
right,
but I'm not going to die. There's this amazing kind of confidence that's beyond him. You know, it really is beyond what he could have grasped at that time. We act like, when we read the Bible, like David knew the end of the story. I mean, the Lord did reveal various things. We know that. But this is an amazing connection to courageous faith.
And I think the other thing that jumps out is this is a really long quote. For most Hebrew Bible or Old Testament quotes that are quoted in the New Testament, usually it's like a phrase or a couple words or something. It's almost like Peter saying this whole psalm was about this. It also jumped out to me, verse 28 of Acts 2, you have made known to me the ways of life. You will make me full of gladness with your presence. So going back to how God works out the good of those who love him, it's with his very presence. When we're lacking, when we're struggling, whatever, it's he himself is the provision.
That's right.
Of his presence. And that is the way of life.
I am the way.
Yeah.
He is the life. And that kind of, if we wanted to summarize all of it, is remembering that he is the life. He is our purpose. As we live trusting him, keeping him ever before us, we find life because he is life. He never will leave us or forsake us. And we have a future and a hope because of him.
Vivian Mabuni summarizing our week in Psalm 16. You've been studying Psalm 16, a psalm of trust, with Vivian and Elisa Morgan and Daniel Ryan Day and Rasool Berry. I'm Brian Hettinga, and I hope you found that to be a faith-building, trust-building hour together. Thanks for being part of the Discover the Word group. Discover the Word is a small group Bible study from Our Daily Bread Ministries in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in which we invite you to walk with us through topics and passages that inform the way we read the Scriptures, challenge us as we live our lives as followers of Christ, and always point us to discover Jesus in the pages of the Bible. Because our mission is to make the Bible understandable and accessible to people all around the world. And in addition to radio programs and podcasts and devotionals and books, we also have unique programs reaching people with specific needs across the globe. One example is our Africa Literacy Program that teaches people how to read using our materials. We are so grateful for your support, which makes it possible for us to share the life-changing story and wisdom of the Bible. If you'd like to partner with us financially, you can go to our discovertheword.org website and click the Donate button that's up at the top of the page. Thanks. And thanks for listening. Discover the Word is Bible engagement for life, provided by Our Daily Bread Ministries.